I've been reflecting a little bit lately on how I ever got into this ministry business. I remembered when I was deciding where to study to be in the ministry, there was a lot to consider in my life at the time. I was living in New York City, so I was trying to look for something, a little nearby. In New York, you do that. It's like, it should come to me. The idea of jetting off to Chicago or to Berkeley, California, where two Unitarian Universalist seminaries were located, just wasn't in the cards. I had a fiance at the time who was going to keep working in New York City, and we had an apartment there. And so we'd made a promise to each other, and I intended to keep it. So part of my decision to attend the school I did had to do with the UU community that was there. Unitarian Universalists were a very small group at that school at that time. A school closer by and only a block from where I was working at the time boasted a very healthy representation of Unitarian Universalists, and it might have been nice to have so many compatriots everywhere I looked in class and around the hallways. It would have been much easier to commute the one block to work, but I've rarely been guided by factors as practical as these. You can just ask my parents. Hi, Dad. I liked the small community at my school. It just felt right. And I liked that we were not a majority by any means, or even a plurality like I might have been at that other school closer by. No, if I was really going to learn what it meant to be in the wider religious world, being at a large school and part of a tiny group was what I wanted to do. There were other factors too, but those were the main ones. What I found there was exactly what I was looking for: a small, dedicated group of individuals trying to change the world, like here. And we had the most marvelous advisor. Our UU advisor was one of the most accomplished scholars I'd ever met. She had a cross appointment at the Divinity School and the History Department, where I went to school and in a lot of other places. That's kind of a big deal. And she took on more advising than she had to, just so, and all while she was trying to make tenure, took on more advising, just so that the UU students would also be able to have a UU advisor. Once in a while, she'd have us over to her house to hang out with her family, who were awesome. Like her son was a chess champion or something like that. She was the best. They had hens and chickens. It was great. So I was excited when I learned that I'd be able to take one of my one required classes that you actually have in seminary called Transitional Moments from her. Transitional Moments in religious history was one of the only required courses in seminary. Think of it like a history class for ministers, but it focused primarily on the moments or ages when the most change came to the Christian world or the parts of the world where Christianity was popular. In one of the most memorable classes we had, and there were a few, our advisor lectured on the First Council of Nicaea. This was a big meeting called by Emperor Constantine I of the Roman Empire to sort of work out what the real meaning of Christianity would be for all the rest of the Roman Empire. It was held in 325. For those of you who don't know, it took a little more than 3 centuries to work out what Christianity really was. And the groups were called upon from around the Christian world to send bishops as their delegates, or their representatives. There wasn't a lot of voting going on. One of the great concerns of the day was a bishop living and working in Alexandria, Egypt, and very popular in that wide expanse of northern Africa, which at the time was a huge cultural and military powerhouse of the Roman Empire. Even today, some of the most studied theologians, often referred to as the church fathers, were writing and working there in northern Africa, and Bishop Arius was among them. They were his peers. But he was a little different from a lot of them. He had read these Gospels over and over. He pored over every word, likely in an array of languages, and for him, something was missing, something important. He could not see how the doctrine of the Trinity ever came to be. He was super popular. The Trinity in Christian circles means that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are of one substance. It means that they each are the same. None existed before the other or after, and none has ever ended. They are one, three in one. It's one of the beautiful mysteries of the faith of many Christians around the world today, though not all. But Bishop Arius, try as he might, could not see where this came from and would not get on board. His reading of the ancient text said that God came first, God was unitary. You see where I'm going with this, I'm betting. And that the unitary God created all else, including Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And Arius said that would later be called, these were called Unitarian, small u, just like sort of, conservative small c or liberal small l. Unitarian views were getting really popular. A lot of Northern Africa was on board with his teachings. He's described as very engaging and charismatic, and a lot of people kind of inappropriately commented on his handsomeness, but it was helping spread the message. So the Council of Nicaea was called in large part to address the popularity of Arius's writings. Now, come back to divinity school with me. Imagine a classroom of mostly Christian ministers in training listening to what might unfold in this lecture. Our UU advisor up front explained that the emperor himself and his wife presided over the entire council. There were, I believe, some cracks about the separation of church and state in that moment. Then she explained that really only select bishops were there at the council at all. I think she put it at about 10% representation for all the areas of Christendom. So the number of other bishops seeing things Bishop Arius's way were intentionally pretty limited. To put it in modern political parlance, the deck was stacked. And then came the moment when our advisor went through some of the phrases of the statement or creed that came out of that council, often referred to as the Nicene Creed. You're so good for sticking with me with all this nerdiness. And it became painfully clear to me and to many of my classmates that parts of the creed itself were only direct, line-by-line refutations of the teachings of Bishop Arius. Our advisor didn't have the bad taste in that moment to start converting anyone to Unitarianism right there on the spot. But it did dawn on some of my friends for this first time that this faith they always imagined to be set in stone, this faith they had grown up to always know, that the creed of their faith, their entire life actually, that they were required to profess to be true in their jobs, was created during a council of political theater and as an argument against one of the most popular teachers of the day. The creed was decided and agreed upon, and then the council made quick work of the continued teachings about this single Unitarian God they're hearing so much about. Yeah, Arius was excommunicated, and he and his friends had to flee to Palestine. They were later invited back, but that's for another sermon. I promise I won't subject this to you next week. And just in case anyone was wondering if Bishop Arius's writings would be studied by scholars and colleagues of his day, here's the final word from the Emperor Constantine on the fate of Arius's work. In addition, if any writing composed by Arius should be found, it should be handed over to the flames, so that not only will the wickedness of his teaching be obliterated, but nothing will be left even to remind anyone of him. And I hereby make a public order that if someone should be discovered to have hidden a writing composed by Arius and not to have immediately brought it forward and destroyed it by fire, his penalty shall be death. And as soon as he is discovered in this offense, he shall be submitted for capital punishment. Yeah, the Roman emperors were not big fans of dissent, but they were really big fans of fire. I'm looking at you, Nero. So today, no original writings of Arius exist. Arius found that things did not always go the way we want. And I sort of knew that too. See, I'd selected my school where I was learning all of this amazing history because of its proximity to my home in New York City that I shared with my fiance. And wouldn't you know it, that it was that very first weekend home from divinity school over the Labor Day weekend when my engagement and my relationship came crashing down in one moment. I was told by my divinity school advisor I was not the first minister in training that this happened to. So I was only 4 days into my first semester when this happened. So I had a choice. The thing tying me to there that I thought was tying me there was gone. He got out fast. I had the doorman throw him out. Anyway, I could, that's definitely another sermon. I could still get all my money back from the school and figure out some other plan. I thought about taking a year off and checking out other schools, but something had happened that many of us here understand. I'd found my tribe. First, I was living in an intentional community like a good hippie with 7 other people. When I told them what happened, they embraced me. Yes, they wondered also why I was locking myself in my room for hours and hours rewatching Frozen, but they loved me anyway, and that's a whole different story. And there was this tiny little band of Unitarian Universalists, like 7 of us in this divinity school of 300, and our amazing advisor. They loved me through that awful time when such a huge part of my life came crashing in on itself. And it was in these moments, in one of the darkest times of my short life, that I came to understand this faith, my faith, our faith, most clearly. For in the pain of broken promises made to me by someone I loved came the understanding, the silent nodding, really the fond embrace of community and of covenant. This month we look together at the theme of covenant. Often Unitarian Universalism is called a non-creedal faith. That always makes me chuckle a little bit. It's sort of like asking someone which sports they follow and they say, not hockey. Great, that's super helpful. It doesn't really answer the question. It's a little more accurate to say that Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal faith. Now, you could have slipped into the back of any one of my Hebrew Scriptures classes or our world religions classes and got your head spinning about the multitude of beautiful covenants you'll find all over the sacred texts and the histories of faiths around the world. But at its core, a covenant is a promise or a set of promises usually made in 2 directions, like promising one another something. The creed is a creed is sort of in one direction, like here's a set of beliefs and you should stick to them, or else. In our reading today, Gabe shared some of those comparisons between a creed and a covenant. It's really a beautiful reading. I've also heard the difference between a creed and a covenant described like this. A creed tells, a covenant asks. I've also heard a creed talks, a covenant walks. Anyway, it's a little ableist. Today, we remember one of the most important covenants in the history of Unitarian Universalism, the flower communion. In its original form, it asked families to bring a flower from their own garden, I like this part, or just from the roadside, or from a nearby field. It's beautiful. And just kind of put them in a vase as they entered the church in the morning. All the flowers would be collected in one place. And doing this signified the free will with which all remember their covenant with their friends and neighbors, even if it's from a neighboring field or a roadside. Then each participant would take home a different flower that had been blessed and consecrated in the service. Flower communion was brought from Europe by Maya V. Čapek, the wife of Norbert Čapek, the founder of the Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia and creator of the flower communion. And May Day is what? Thank you. That's right. May Day is one of the days when these lands celebrate, as Gabe so beautifully put, the beautiful diversity of culture and the ways these cultures are loved and treasured and nourished in these lands that provide them shelter and a place to grow. On this day, we celebrate the sharing of cultures by exchanging lei for our own flower communion. Norbert Chapek was a Unitarian minister, and his call was to stand with those who needed his support. When Nazi invasion started across Europe, he did what he was called by his faith, by his covenant to do, and he stood up to the Nazis who invaded his lands and was arrested and sent to the Dachau death camp. These are his last recorded words. "It is worthwhile to live and fight courageously for sacred ideals. Oh, blow ye evil winds into my body's fire. My soul you'll never unravel. Even though disappointed 1,000 times or fallen in the fight and everything would worthless seem, I have lived amidst eternity. Be grateful, my soul. My life was worth living. He who was pressed from all sides but remained victorious in spirit is welcomed into the choir of heroes. He who overcame the fetters, giving wing to the mind, is entering into the golden age of the victorious." I could probably just end it there. These are pretty good words. But friends, we are met here on Lay Day, a celebration of so much of the beauty of these lands. I was discussing before worship a little bit about the Hala lei. It's the first lei that's actually mentioned in the Kumulipo, the sacred text of the Hawaiian religion, in the translation gifted to us by Queen Liliuokalani. It's in the 5th era, or the 5th Va, written in the Kumulipo, where it says that the hala hala, which is a kind of pine, was born with a lei hala. Some explain that the hala lei is given at pivotal times of transition because it means to pass on, to pass through, is that? And the giving of that lei signifies accepting everything about that transition, the errors, the feelings, the passing through, and often forgiving those things and moving to a new phase in life. We make so many covenants in life. We're covenant-making creatures. We can't help it. And when covenants reach an end, or when they are left, or when we ask to be released from their power, it can be painful. Creeds tell, covenants ask. In the coming weeks, I will ask you to please release me from the covenant we have made as pastor and congregation. And I will be asking you to affirm the covenant so many of you witnessed me make to our wider free faith when you ordained me right here. To be a minister to all who will answer the call of justice in the face of injustice, to help to heal a hurting world. Because at the core of every covenant is that thing we love, choice. And to be a person who chooses has a word that our ancient church folk really like to sling around. I don't know, say at councils about creeds. And that word is heretic. It means one who chooses. We merry heretics dare every day to choose, because that's how a covenant works every single day. Every day, we strive to choose dignity and worth of our neighbor over thoughtlessness and carelessness centered on ourselves. Every day, we strive to choose to move toward a more just and jubilant world over the stuck places and static sets of beliefs that can land us stuck. Every day, we strive to choose to learn, to uncover, to reconsider all that we thought we knew over the dullness of a world prescribed to us. That is an everyday faith. That is a loving faith. That is an embracing faith. That is our faith. That is a faith that calls out from fires that would seek to silence us and our forebears, with a voice that calls to each of us, to all of us, with the words that Norbert Chapek spoke at his last: "Be grateful, my soul, my life was worth living." May your own soul, may your own voice, may your own covenants speak to you, speak to all. And may it ever be so. Amen.